It looks like we are live. So, good morning, everybody, and good early morning for those of you on the West Coast. Thank you all in Zoom for hopping in, and everybody on Facebook as well for joining us live today. If we have never formally met, hi, nice to meet you. My name is Aubrey. I am one of the senior culinary dietitians on the Unite for Her team, and I'm really excited today to share with you my cooking class. Before I get into that, I just wanted to remind everybody on Zoom and who is watching on Facebook of the housekeeping. If you're on Zoom, try to keep yourself muted just so there's no background noise. We appreciate it. However, feel free to unmute if you have a question. On questions, Rachel, my lovely co host, will be watching the chat on Zoom and on Facebook, and she will bring any questions to my attention. So if I don't see them or if they're on Facebook, make sure you ask them when they come up. I don't want you to feel like you have to wait a while, especially if it has to do with something I'm doing right now. And let me pause and take a second to ask, is anybody cooking along today? I don't think anybody asked for the recipes, but is anybody planning to cook along? All right, great. Well, if you are, certainly let me know. You can always pop that in the chat if you have questions. If you need me to slow down or anything at all, just let me know. We'll be putting the recipes into both chats, Zoom and Facebook, so you'll get those recipes there. And I actually popped something in the oven if you just heard that timer go off. So let me quick take out my bread that we're going to be using later. I'm very excited for it. And we'll go ahead and we'll get into the beginning of our cooking class. All right, so I set that bread to the side. So, welcome everybody to our dinner for two cooking class. Why dinner for two? Well, because I live in a household of two people, and after these cooking demos, I find myself with a large quantity of all these dishes. And I've talked to a lot of members who have mentioned similar things. They live in a household of one or two people, and these dishes that make 4, 6, 8 servings can be a little overwhelming because we might not be able to get to all those leftovers before they go bad. So, dinner for two, each of my 3 recipes today just makes 2 servings. So, one for you, one for someone else, or hey, 2 for you if you want to have that. You can also certainly multiply these recipes. Very easy to modify and double or triple if you do have more people in your household. They're very, very flexible recipes. So, like I said, we're making 3 recipes today. First, before we get started, if you've never been to one of our cooking classes previously, we always start with something called food for thought. Food for thought is where we take a brief moment to talk about the nutrition properties of one of the things we'll be utilizing during the cooking class. We particularly like to put a highlight on our plant foods because we talk a lot about the benefit of those, but sometimes we don't always know what is the particular benefit of a particular food. So today, our food for thought moment presented to you by Merck is going to be all about tahini. So you'll see here, this is actually a shakeable container of tahini. It's quite thin. However, they also sell it in jars. Tahini is a sesame seed butter. It's made of toasted sesame seeds ground into a thick, oily paste, very similar to peanut butter, cashew butter, any of our nut and seed butters. Since it is a seed butter, it has a lot of those similar properties of protein and healthy fats, but it's also going to be a rich source of minerals. Thinking about tahini and sesame seeds, tahini is going to be rich in copper. Copper helps with our red blood cell production. It helps to absorb iron and it helps to prevent anemia. So, for anybody who's having issues with your red blood cells and your blood cell values with your labs, getting in 2 tablespoons of tahini gives you 53% of the daily value of copper. It's also a great source of another mineral, selenium, which is known as an antioxidant. So it's going to help fight off oxidative stress and damage of our cells, but also help to produce DNA. Additionally, on the antioxidants, since it has sesame seeds, it's rich in 2 particular antioxidants, sesamin and sesamol. Try saying those 10 times fast. Sesamin and sesamol have been shown and extensively studied for their anti-cancer properties, reducing tumor growth. But additionally, sesamol also has anti-aging and anti-inflammatory properties as well. Overall, as well, tahini and sesame seeds are going to be one of the largest sources of phytosterols. Phytosterols have been shown to help lower our cholesterol. So anybody who's also experiencing cholesterol issues, adding in seeds, particularly sesame seeds, can help lower those values. So a lot of great benefits to our tahini. We're going to get to the tahini a little bit later. So I'm going to put it off to the side for now. However, again, as I mentioned, we have three really delicious recipes. And I actually realized as I was writing the notes for today that we're kind of traveling around with our recipes. So first, we're going to start out by starting our recipe for our tofu banh mi sandwich. Tofu, banh mi's, and banh mi's in general are a Vietnamese cuisine. It is a sandwich traditionally with meat and a pickled vegetable on it. Sometimes there's a pate spread on it. We're going to put a little different twist on it today. And I made the recipe to be even more simplified in a way that I think it just makes it a lot more accessible. So first and foremost, we're going to start making our pickled vegetables. So let me go into the fridge and I'll grab our first ingredient. This is packaged slaw mix. So you can see this is rainbow slaw. In the recipe, I put that you can use any kind of slaw mix. Now, when I was reviewing recipes, many of the recipes gave specific vegetables that you wanted to use, carrots, radishes, etc. You could certainly do that. However, I know a lot of us are busy, right? We maybe don't have the time. We don't want to waste anything. So we don't want to buy a bunch of radishes and only use one of them. A slaw mix is a great way to get in a variety of different vegetables without having to buy a whole bunch. Plus, it's pre-shredded. So they're already in small pieces, makes it easy for a sandwich. We need a cup of our slaw mix. You can use any slaw mix. Again, this is rainbow, but they just have the regular cabbage slaw mix. I've seen like broccoli slaw and Brussels slaw. So there's a lot of options. This has cabbage, carrots, looks like a little bit of broccoli in there too. I'm actually going to take out some of the bigger pieces of broccoli just because we're putting it on a sandwich and that would be a little bit tough to bite on a sandwich. I'll get mostly the shredded items. Okay, so I got about a cup here. Perfect. I'll put that broccoli back in there for later. And I'll put that back in the fridge. And now what we're going to do is we're going to quick pickle it. Quick pickle is a method where you're pickling for just a brief amount of time, but it's really effective to get a lot of that pickled flavor. Traditionally, pickling takes a couple hours, a couple days to get a lot of that pickle flavor, but quick pickling is great because it just makes it a little faster. So I'm pouring all of this into a jar. And what we're going to do is we're going to top it off with some water, rice vinegar, sugar, and salt. And those are the key ingredients, water, vinegar, sugar, salt, in making that pickling liquid. So we need a third a cup of rice vinegar. So I'll pour that in. You could use any type of vinegar too if you don't have rice vinegar on hand. And then we also need a third a cup of water. So I'll pour in the rice vinegar. And then I'll get a third a cup of water out of the sink. All right, and then you're gonna need a half teaspoon of salt and a half teaspoon of sugar. A lot of times I'll get questions, what kind of salt, what kind of sugar? I'm using kosher salt here. You could use, sea salt, pink salt, whatever salt you have on hand. And sugar, I find it easiest to use just regular white sugar. However, you could use honey or maple syrup or agave if you would prefer. Make sure you're giving everything a good mix. The salt and the sugar and the acid of the vinegar help to give it that pickly flavor. All right, so I'm going to move these just out of the way a little bit. And then I'm going to give everything a good little mix. So let me get a spoon. And I want to just mix it up to make sure that the sugar is all in there, the salt's all in there, it's not just sitting on top. And I like to put this in a jar with a closing lid because I feel like it helps just really capture that pickle. All right, so what you want to do is you want to make sure that all of your veggies are covered. So in here, I can see that the water is above our veggies. So I'm going to put the lid on. We're just going to let it sit until we're ready for it. Ideally, you want to let it sit as long as you can. So for the purposes of today, we're maybe going to let it sit for 30, 40 minutes or so. Now we're going to start marinating our tofu because I said these are tofu banh mi sandwiches. We're going to start marinating our tofu so that we can let that soak up a bunch of that delicious flavor. So I will get out my cutting board. You're going to also need a towel so that we can soak up some of the moisture from that tofu. And you're going to need a shallow dish. The shallow dish is important to make sure all of the tofu is really getting covered and kind of coated by this marinade that we're going to make. So I'll take all my little ingredients and tools out, and I've got my shallow dish here. So first and foremost, we're going to need a little bit of oil. We're going to need about half a tablespoon of oil. So I'll go ahead and I'm just going to pour it directly into the shallow dish. You could pour it into a glass jar or a bowl first and then pour it over your tofu, but I think it's just easier to make it in here. So I've got my oil. Then I'm going to need 1 tablespoon of tamari. Tamari is a gluten-free soy sauce. So you can see here it actually says tamari soy sauce. You can use regular soy sauce too. All right, so I'm going to put in 1. This is a half tablespoon measure. So I got 1 and I got 2. Perfect. All right, then you're going to need about a quarter of a lime. I have a half a lime here. Flexible with these recipes. What you'll find about me in the kitchen, if you've never been to one of my cooking classes before, is I like to be flexible because I think that's what makes cooking fun. And it also is what makes cooking accessible. You don't want to have all these leftovers. You don't want to feel really rigid. You don't want to feel like if you mess up one thing, you've messed up the whole recipe. I never want anyone to feel that way. So feel free to be flexible with these measurements. So I've got the juice from my quarter lemon or my quarter lime. And now I'm going to also just take the zest from it. So I juiced it and now I'm just going to zest it. If you don't have a zester, you could use a small cheese grater as well, using the finest setting on that cheese grater. Okay. And I'm just kind of going around, getting off as much zest as I can. Not stressed about getting all of it off. I just want to get off as much makes sense. Perfect. So I'll take the zest out of here, make sure we get that in there because the zest adds a lot of flavor. I used to not be a zester. I used to always skip that step because I was like, does it really make a difference? Yes, it does really make a difference. It's got a really, really great flavor. So definitely make sure you're always zesting. All right, now I need a quarter teaspoon of ginger or ginger paste. So I love this ginger paste that you can get at the store because it's tough, right? To peel and grate ginger. Sometimes this ginger paste makes life so much easier. We're actually going to use it again in a little bit. So we'll put it off to the side. We'll revisit it. You're also going to need a quarter teaspoon of pepper. I'm just going to grate some pepper over here. And then last but not least, you're going to need a clove of garlic. So I really like to use my garlic press. Just makes life easier when you're cutting garlic. So you put the garlic clove in and you'll just take it and you'll press down and it minces the garlic for you. Now, you do have to clean it out afterwards, which is the unfun portion of it. However, I think especially if you're having issues with neuropathy or pain or anything like that, it can be helpful to have some of these accessible tools to make cooking just a little bit easier for you, but also great opportunity to ask somebody to help. I think a lot of times we know that people want to help, but we don't always know how to ask them for help. Maybe you're asking them to chop up a bunch of garlic for you at the beginning of the week so that you have it in the fridge readily available, or you're asking them to cook you one of these dinner for 2 recipes, making sure that we're definitely taking advantage of the support when we have it available to us. All right, so I made this little marinade in here. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to prep my tofu. So for this, we need about a half of a brick of tofu. And when I say brick of tofu, that means about 14 ounces. That's what most of our tofu comes in. So I'll get that out of the fridge. Oops, there we go. All right, perfect. So I've got my tofu here. You can see I just have regular extra firm tofu. What I'm going to do is I'm going to open the container, maybe with a knife instead of my hand, and I'm going to pour out the liquid in the container. I like to kind of just cut one side and drain it out. I think that helps to make it a little bit less messy. And then once you get most of the liquid out, then you can kind of cut down the other sides. All right, so we'll open this up. And so, like I said, we're going to need about half of it. So I'll show you what the tofu looks like. If you've never used tofu before, when you buy it in the extra firm or firm varieties, it comes in this brick or this block of tofu. Since it sits in liquid, it needs the liquid to kind of come out of it to be able to absorb some of that flavor. So what we're going to do, I'm going to keep my little container since I do still have half of a brick of tofu. And I'm going to take my tofu. I'm going to cut it in half in middle-ish, right? You know, we're just loosely figuring out where the middle is. I'll take my other half of tofu. I'll put it back. And I'll just go ahead and pop it back in the fridge since it does need to be refrigerated. And then I'll show you what we're going to do with the rest of the tofu. This is great to put in the freezer, to crumble into smoothies, to have as another dish later on. You know, I think sometimes when we use only part of something, we get caught up in like, what am I going to do with the rest of it? Tofu is so flexible. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take it and I'm going to just cut about half-inch thick pieces. So let's see how many I can get. I'm on 3, 4. I'll try to make it even so that on the sandwiches it's even. So we'll do 6 pieces. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to take them and I'm going to try to press out a little bit of the moisture. You can, if you have time in advance, take your tofu before you chop it. I would recommend wrap it in a towel, put something heavy on top of it. Not like an anvil heavy, but you know, a cookbook, a couple cookbooks, that helps to slowly push out the moisture because with this process, we want to make sure we're not squishing it too hard that we're completely squishing and losing the integrity of the tofu. But we're getting out a lot of the moisture here by just kind of pressing down on it. So I'll do kind of 2 at once just to speed up the process. And we're just pushing out the moisture. Perfect. And as I do these, I'm just going to start to put them into the marinade as well. And I'll put all 3 in at the end. There we go. And I'm just going to push out the moisture. And the moisture removal helps so that it absorbs the flavor of the marinade again. So if you don't have time to remove as much moisture, it just may not get as much of that flavor from the marinade. All right, so I'm going to put all these in. What I'm going to do too is I'm going to take them in my marinade and I'm just going to kind of flip them around to make sure they're getting all coated. It smells so good. We haven't even cooked them yet and they smell delicious. All right, perfect. So here's our tofu marinating. I'm just going to put it off to the side next to my slaw, and we're going to revisit that in about 15 minutes. The longer, the better. So if you have more time to let it marinate, that's going to be better to help it absorb the flavor. But again, we're in a cooking class, so we don't have all the time in the world. I want to show you how you can make all these recipes in a quick amount of time. So 15 minutes minimum. All right, so we'll just tidy up a little bit. We're going to move on to our Za'atar sheet pan chicken. So I have my oven right now at 375 because I was cooking that bread. Let me raise it. I'm actually going to raise it to 450. We need it at 450 for another recipe. So we're just going to kind of blanket cook these 2 things at 450. So first and foremost, our Za'atar sheet pan chicken. We're going to use chicken thighs. You could use chicken breasts. You could use fish, salmon, you know, whitefish. You could use chickpeas. You could use tofu. You could use beans. This marinade is super flexible. So definitely don't feel nailed to only using chicken thighs. I pre-marinated my chicken thighs. You should ideally let them marinate for at least 30 minutes overnight if you can. So I just did it this morning while I was getting ready so that they had a little bit more time to marinate. So I'll show you. we've got, and it looks a little silly because my first bag, the zipper broke, but we've got our chicken thighs marinating in here. So Za'atar is a Middle Eastern spice. It's got sesame seeds, so we're getting these sesame seeds all around, but it's also got things like marjoram. It's got greens in there. It's a really zesty, powerful spice. I marinated these chicken thighs in some Za'atar, some oil, some lemon juice, some salt. So they've been sitting for, you could say maybe an hour or two. We'll get to them in just a second. We need to prep the rest of the things that we need. So the first part of cooking is we're going to be cooking them with some potatoes. These are fingerling potatoes. They're called fingerling because they're long and thin like fingers. The recipe calls for a half a pound, which I, through a Google search, found is about 5 to 10 fingerling potatoes, just depending on the size. So I'm using 5 today because mine are kind of big. Some of them are thick. The key here is that you want the potatoes to all be similar sizes. So if you have a couple that are really, really big, you might want to cut them in quarters instead of in half because we want to make sure that they're cooking all at the same time. So we don't have some potatoes that are hard, some potatoes that are soft. Okay, so I've got most of these sliced. Perfect. All right, so I'll show you, we have all these fingerling potatoes here. So what we're going to do is we're going to transfer the chicken and the fingerling potatoes to a sheet pan. We're not going to put it in the oven just yet because we do have a couple other things to chop first. But I'll grab some of my ingredients, kind of move them out of frame here so you don't have to look at them. All right, so I am going to grab my sheet pan, and what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my potatoes on it. And I just heard my oven preheat, which is perfect. And then I'm going to put my chicken and I'm going to pour the rest of the marinade over top of the potatoes, and I'm going to kind of mix it together. So I'm big on food safety, so I want to be very cautious with this. I don't want to shake the bag all around. I kind of am just going to fold it up, put it back in this little bag, and immediately throw it in the trash. And then after I'm done with mixing these, I'm going to immediately wash my hands because I don't want to accidentally touch anything else with my chicken hands. I have 2 chicken thighs here. You'll see the recipe calls for about a half a pound of chicken thighs. I found that I had 2 pretty big chicken thighs in the package that I bought. So I just put those both on the pan or in the bag. All right, so now most of my potatoes, you just want your potatoes to be kind of coated in that seasoning. I'm going to put the chicken thighs kind of off to one side, and then I'm going to layer out my potatoes next to them. We're going to be adding more to this pan over time, so it's okay if there's an empty portion on the side of your pan. So let's make space. There we go. Perfect. All right, so let me wash my hands. I'll show you what the pan looks like. And while I'm washing my hands, I just want to make sure I pause. Any questions before we move on to next steps? All right, perfect. Any questions, again, feel free to put them in the chat, Facebook or Zoom, and I would be happy to answer them along the way. All right, here is our chicken and our potatoes. Like I said, we've got some other stuff to work on, so I'm just going to pop them off to the side for now. Let me move my pan out of the way. We're going to put this and some stuff for our other recipe in the oven at the same time. Actually, I'm going to put this in the oven first, just thinking on timing. And this is going to cook while I'm prepping my other stuff. Let's be efficient with our time here. So I'll put this in. We want this to be in the oven for about 10, 15 minutes or so before we move on to our next step. So I'll set a timer for 15. If we kind of finish the other steps before, oh, and I see a question, is tahini available at most stores? Which section? Yes, so tahini is available at most stores. I find it most often either with the nut butters and the seed butters in the area, or in the international or sometimes the kosher section of your store. So I believe I found that squeezable bottle in the kosher section of my grocery store. You can also, too, I always tell people if you can't find something, ask a worker and they may be able to support you. And a lot of grocery stores now actually have apps where you can put in what you're looking for and it will tell you what aisle to visit for that particular food. So good question. You could also use a different nut or seed butter if you have that on hand, peanut butter or something like that instead of tahini. All right, perfect. Like I was saying, we're putting that in the oven, give it a little bit. We'll come back, revisit it because we're going to need to cook it longer. We're going to chop some of the other things we'll need for this. So we need broccoli. Recipe calls for about a half of a head of broccoli. So what I'm going to do is I'm actually just going to kind of take a little bit of it off. And it's a kind of small head of broccoli anyway. So I'll put that off to the side. I'll use that, put that in the fridge. And what I'll do, take my broccoli and I'm just gonna chop right through. And I don't love, these huge heads. So sometimes what I'll do is I'll kind of move over the smaller pieces and then the larger pieces, I'll just chop the stem again a little closer up to the broccoli florets. And then we get more small pieces coming out of it. Right, perfect. And if anybody has a garden that you're working on this time of year, these broccoli stems, if you don't want to use them, you could put it in your compost to go into your garden. I usually like to just kind of chop it up a little bit before I put it into the composter. You could also save it and you could make something like vegetable broth with it, cook it for a few hours with some water, some herbs, some of your leftover veggies, and you could make a delicious broth from it. All right, so we've got the broccoli in there. We're also going to slice an onion, a red onion. So I'm going to peel off the skin here. I have about a half of a red onion. I'm going to peel that skin off. I'm just going to slice it kind of into wedges. So I'm going to take it, and I left the top on as a stability. I'm just going to slice right through into some long strips. And then I'm going to cut the top off. And then I like to check, make sure it's all separated. Perfect. Now we've got, you can see, some strips of our red onion. All right, so I'm going to go ahead, put all that in with our broccoli. And what we're going to do is after this has been cooking, the chicken and the potatoes, because they take a little longer, after it's been cooking for about, 10, 15 minutes, we're going to add this broccoli and this onion to the sheet pan. When I made my marinade for the chicken, before I put the chicken in, I took about 2 tablespoons out of that marinade bag. And what I'm going to do now is I'm going to pull that out of the fridge. And you can see the marinade up close. I'll show you too. It's got the sesame seeds for the za'atar. It's nice and oily. I'm going to pour it over top of these veggies. And I like to kind of get all of it out. And then I just mix with my hands. You could, of course, mix with tongs, whatever you have. I feel like especially with broccoli, it can really, some of the spices and the oil can get kind of stuck in those florets. So I like to use my hands to just manipulate it. All right, perfect. So now we've got some broccoli and some onion. We'll put that on once that comes out. We're also going to prep our tahini sauce. So now we're going to get to the tahini. I know we've been waiting to use it since we heard about it at the beginning. The tahini sauce is going to be great at the end. We're just going to drizzle it over the top. So, all right. So for this, I've got my lemon. I'm going to need my tahini. There it is. We're also going to need a little bit of water, a little bit of salt. So I need about 2 tablespoons of tahini. So I've got my little dish here. 2 tablespoons is about 1/8 a cup. So I have 1/8 a cup measure here. I like to really shake this tahini up. And I don't think I mentioned this, but I really prefer the squeezable version because the jar version can just be a little bit difficult sometimes, simply because it's just like a natural peanut butter. So you're going to have to give it a really good solid stir to make sure that it's all incorporating together. All right, so we're going to need about 1 tablespoon of lemon juice. So with any citrus, I like to roll it a little bit on the counter first to get some of that juice to loosen up. Sometimes you'll kind of see the skin even breaking apart a little bit. So I'm going to just cut it in half. And I'm going to take half and I'm going to squeeze it in with my tahini. All right, perfect. If it's more than 1 tablespoon, that's okay. That's totally fine. Again, we're not picky here in this kitchen. I'm also going to put a little sprinkle of salt in there. So let's see, I've got my salt over here. All right. I'll just put a little sprinkle. And then you need about 1.5 tablespoons of water and then 1 tablespoon of oil. So I'm going to use my 1/8 cup measure and fill it all the way. We'll do that for our water. And then the oil, I have my tablespoon measure here. So I'm going to do 1 tablespoon of oil. Perfect. And that's our drizzling tahini sauce. I'm going to go ahead, give it a really good mix with a fork. You may have to remix it as you get closer. We're not going to use this for a little bit. This, we're going to drizzle over everything at the end. And I feel like it does a great job of tying everything together. So it's a really thin sauce. I can't even kind of pick it up and drizzle it with the fork because it's so thin. We'll set it off to the side and we will come back to it in just a little bit. All right, so I'll move this lemon out of the way. I'll just tidy up the workspace just a little. And looks like we've got about 7-8 minutes left before we take out that chicken. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to start getting ready some of our ingredients for our third recipe, which is our curry, cauliflower, and chickpea salad. So this recipe, so easy. You literally just toss a couple things into the oven, make a dressing, and boom, you're done. I get a lot of questions about store-bought dressing and is it okay to have store-bought dressing, which absolutely, yes, it is. I would always try to look for one that's maybe lower ingredient. However, this recipe is so fun because you can make your own dressing. So it's really nice. All right, so I've got all my ingredients here that I'm going to need. I'm also going to need my sheet pan back here, but we'll get to that. As I start to kind of chop things up and I start to make them, I'm going to just toss them behind me on the sheet pan. So right now I have half of a head of cauliflower. We need about 1.5 cups. So I'm going to cut this base off here. Same thing. You could save it. You could put it into compost. You can do whatever you would like with it. If you've ever cut cauliflower before, you know that it can be a little bit messy. So we'll try our best here to keep it on the cutting board. However, if we can't, we can't. And I'll move that out of the way just so you guys can see me chopping up the cauliflower. So with cauliflower, you could cut it a wide variety of ways. Sometimes I like to go in and cut off this stem here. You can also just kind of slice through it. You can turn cauliflower into cauliflower steaks that you can grill, making a nice big piece out of it. I'm just going to cut out the stem here and I'll pull that out. I'll pull the head pieces off and then I'll cut it once more. And we've got a couple little greenery pieces, so I'll move those over. All right, and then I'm just going to do some extra chopping. This is for a salad. And so a lot of times people will ask me, like, how do you make salads that you like or that taste good? My key, which everybody's different, but my key is making everything small. I like to be able to get a really thoughtful bite that's got everything in it. I don't want to have to pick up, huge pieces of cauliflower and that's all I'm picking up with my fork. So I'm just taking my cauliflower, kind of slicing it one way and slicing it the other way. You can see it looks a little bit messy. There's some different size pieces. That's completely fine. You'll get some bigger bites and you'll get some smaller bites. Right. Perfect. So I've got a wide variety of cauliflower bits here on the cutting board. You can see all those there. I'm going to put them on my baking sheet. All right. We're also going to need some carrot. So I'm going to just rinse off my knife because, there's cauliflower everywhere. And then I'm going to slice up some carrots. So I have these carrots that I peeled and I chopped the ends off of. And I'm just going to kind of cut them into small rounds. And as I get about halfway through, I'll stop. And I'm going to slice the carrot in half, both of them, so that, again, the pieces are maybe a more similar size. So I'm slicing the carrot in half, and then I'm going to keep chopping to get these little rounds and half rounds. All right. And one more. Perfect. So you need about 3/4 cup of these carrots. So I'll move over this and then I'll chop up our last little bit just to get some of this out of the way. You could also use something like a bench scraper just to get everything off of your cutting board. All right. Perfect. And then same thing as the last one. I'm going to cut this in half. And then I'm just going to chop. I try to make them all fairly similar in size. Again, some are bigger, some are thinner, some are thicker. It's completely fine. All right, great. So I'm going to put this over with the pan. And on my pan, I'm also going to put a cup of chickpeas. You could also use an entire can. An entire can is usually about a cup and a half or so, a cup and 2/3. But again, if you don't want to waste, you could certainly use an entire can of chickpeas. So I've got my chickpeas here, garbanzo beans. I'm going to go ahead and pour them on. And this is going to be a lot of the heft of our salad. So we're going to have greens and such with our salad, but this is going to add a lot of bite to it. And so I think that's equally important, making sure that you're getting a really delicious bite when you're making that salad. And so I like having different textures: crunchy, soft, salty, sweet, savory. I like having all these different concepts because I feel like it always keeps me interested when I'm thinking about eating that salad and making that salad. All right, so we've got our chickpeas, our cauliflower, and our carrots over here. So we're going to go ahead and we're going to toss it with a little bit of curry powder, some oil, and some salt. So with this, I like to be a little bit more generous, a little bit more loose with the measurements, kind of a measure with your heart scenario. So I'm going to drizzle on some olive oil, about a tablespoon or so, 2 tablespoons. I'll sprinkle over some salt. Now, if you have coarser salt, be mindful that it does give much more of a salty flavor. All right, and then we need our curry powder. If you've never had curry powder before, like I mentioned, we're kind of traveling all around with this cooking demo. So this is an Indian spice. It's got a very strong flavor. So I would definitely try it in maybe a smaller quantity if you've never had it before. Mix it in with a dressing or something like that to see if you like it. It's got a strong flavor and a strong smell. So your house will definitely smell like curry powder, which I think is a good thing after you're done making these veggies. And I'm just going to use my hands, mix it all together. All right, perfect. I'll break that up. All right, wonderful. So I'm just spreading everything out, making sure it's fairly even on this baking sheet here. I don't want things all kind of stacked on top of each other. Perfect. All right, so I'm gonna rinse off my hands. I'm kind of a messy cooker, so definitely don't follow my lead. You can definitely use forks, tongs, a spatula, etc. to mix this together. All right, so here is our cauliflower, carrots, and chickpeas for our curry cauliflower. And it looks like we had perfect timing because our timer is just about to go off for our chicken. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to take the chicken out. Perfect. So we've got our chicken and our potatoes. And we're going to let everything, these two things, and the broccoli and onions, which I'm going to put on the same baking sheet as my chicken. We're going to let this all cook for another 15, 20, 25 minutes. I give a broad range because everybody's oven is a little bit different. For example, the chicken should be cooking at 425, but now it's cooking at 450 because that's what the cauliflower needs. So, give it whatever time it needs. It also depends on how small you cut up your broccoli and your cauliflower and carrots. If you cut it smaller, it may not take as long to cook, but we're going to give it, let's say we'll start with 15 minutes. All right, perfect. Before we move on, I'm going to chop up this onion, which we're going to need for our salad. So I'm just taking the skin off here again. This onion, I'm going to chop instead of slice. So you'll get to see both variations. So I left this top on here. I'm going to slice right through the middle, not through the top. And then I'm going to slice some long strips. And I'm going to take it and turn it 180 degrees. And I'm going to slice it in the opposite direction to make a little dice. This is going to go with our salad. All right, perfect. So there's all of our onion for our salad. So I'm going to take it, I'm going to put it in my salad bowl over here. And I'll just dump it in there. We're going to mix it all together. So it doesn't matter that it's all sitting on the bottom. No big deal there. And we're going to need to chop up just some herbs at the end. So I'll move this off to the side. Get this plate out of the way too. All right, I'm going to go ahead now and I'm actually going to put the greens in here just to prep. So I like to get the little clamshells of greens. And for this recipe, it's also about 2 cups of greens. I usually just put the entire clamshell in there. Again, I like smaller bites. So you could take your greens and you could chop them up into a chiffonade style of chop. And that would help to just make them a little smaller. But so we've got our greens here. I'll throw this out and we're going to make our dressing. While we make the dressing, I'm going to start heating up our skillet for our tofu. All right, so you want it on about medium-high heat. And what we're going to do is we're just going to sear the tofu kind of on all sides, warm it up, warm it through so that we can make our banh mi sandwiches with it, which will be so, so tasty. We're really getting to wrapping up everything. So I know all the recipes came through the chat. For the last 10, 15 minutes, we might kind of be popping back and forth between some recipes a little bit just as we finish everything up. But you'll see all the finished products, and I invite you to certainly ask any questions as they come up on any of the recipes. All right, so I'm going to wipe this off the table. I like to have just a clean workspace. And I'll let this warm up. It's feeling pretty warm already. I'll give it a little drizzle of olive oil. And then what we'll do is we're just going to take our tofu that we've had sitting in our marinade, and we're just going to lay it out in the pan. You might have to work in batches if you have bigger pieces of tofu or a smaller pan, whatever you have to do. I tried to pick the biggest pan I had so that we could have one batch, but I'm going to lay these out and I'm going to let them kind of start searing on one side while we make the dressing. And then I'll flip them and we can sear them on the other side. It's perfect. They all fit. They all have space too, which is good. All right, so our dressing, to circle back for the curry, cauliflower, and chickpea salad. I love a creamy dressing, but a lot of the creamy dressings at the store have a lot of additives to them to make them that kind of creamy texture. I love making a homemade creamy dressing with Greek yogurt as our kind of creamy factor. It adds a really nice tangy note to it as well. So it's really nice to have that on hand if you want to make a dressing or something of the sort. So I've got my little dressing container here. It's fun. It has measurements on the side, which is nice to help as we're kind of mixing things together. I'm going to get some of the things I need from the fridge. So I need lime, I need yogurt. I also need a jalapeno pepper, which we'll chop up a little bit, but we'll start with our yogurt. I'm going to need about a quarter cup. And luckily, I've got that measurement here on the side of my container. So I'll do a quarter cup of Greek yogurt, a little bit more. We're going to add some water to thin it out. So definitely if you're thinking, this is really thick dressing, don't worry, we're going to add water to thin it out in time. All right, so I'll put this back in the fridge. We're also going to need about a tablespoon of lime juice. So I just have half of a lime here. I'm going to go ahead, I'm going to squeeze the lime juice. I'm going to squeeze out as much as I can get. We're going to also need some of that ginger that I mentioned before that we were revisiting. About a quarter teaspoon. We'll put some salt and some jalapeno pepper in it as well. Now, if you don't want to put in the jalapeno pepper, you certainly don't need to. That just adds a little extra kick into your dressing. And then after we make our additions, our ginger, our salt, our jalapeno, we're just going to add water to thin it out a bit. So we've got some ginger. Again, measure with your heart. We've got some salt, just a little bit. You can put a little pepper in there too if you want, or you can play around with the seasonings. If you want to add some different seasonings that aren't listed, again, do what feels right to you. I'm just going to chop off a little tiny bit of my jalapeno pepper. And I'm going to try to slice it really nice and fine. And then chop it really thin. All right, perfect. Make sure I get all the pieces off. And then I just turned it and I'm going to chop it in the opposite direction. All right, and I can hear my tofu sizzling, which is great news. It means it's getting nice and seared. Before I move on to adding some water and thinning it out, I'm going to take my tofu and give it a flip. So this is definitely more than a quarter teaspoon, but I don't want to waste it. And I like a little spice. Again, you could certainly omit this jalapeno if you want to. So let me flip my tofu. You just, again, want it to be browned on all sides. So I'm going to take each piece. I'm just going to flip it over and it looks nice and brown. Flip. Perfect. All right. Last two pieces. Beautiful. Okay, perfect. So I'm going to leave that to keep sitting while we're finishing out. We've got our little dressing here. And let me make sure I didn't forget anything. We've got yogurt, lime, ginger, jalapeno, and salt. Perfect. I'm going to put in just some water to help it thin out. I don't want it to be super thick. I would say less is more when you're adding water. I did not live by my own recommendation when I said that right then, but less is more. Start with a little bit. You can always add more. You can't always take away. So keep that in mind. All right, so I've got my beautiful little creamy dressing here. So we're going to need that for our salad. I'll leave it until the end to put on the salad. We're also going to mix in with our greens some parsley. So some beautiful fresh parsley adds a really delicious flavor to this. So I've got this entire bushel. What I like to do is I just kind of take a little heap from the top. I'll twist it and rip. And before I do anything, I'm going to give it a little rinse because a lot of times when we get fresh herbs from the store, they may have some dirt or some grime just from when they were grown or packaged. So I give it a little rinse. I like to squeeze out the extra liquid as well. And so I'm going to take it, I like to slice down first, down the length of the stalks. And then I'm going to slice the other way. The key here today with our chopping discussion is Chop one way, turn it 180 degrees, chop the other way. All right. So I'm just kind of chopping. I kind of like a little bit maybe of a more bite of parsley in this because I feel like it adds a really delicious flavor. You could also add the parsley straight into the dressing if you would like. So I'm going to take all this parsley. I'm going to put it in with my greens over here. And then I'm going to go ahead. I'm just going to rinse off my knife, dry it off a little because we're going to need to cut some bread. So I don't want my knife to be soaking wet when I cut my bread. And I'm going to rinse off my cutting board. Perfect. So we're just going to prep to get ready for these banh mi sandwiches. Let's see. Looks like we've got about 5 minutes left in the oven. You want to make sure you're temping your ingredients as well, not necessarily the cauliflower or the carrots or anything like that, but temping the chicken when you take it out of the oven. Make sure you're taking the temperature so that you know that it's cooked all the way through. It should be 165 degrees on the inside. So if you don't have a food thermometer, I think it's a great investment. You can get them for about 10 or 15 bucks on Amazon or at a lot of local stores, Target, Walmart, etc. Might even have it a little cheaper. So definitely go out and grab one just so you can make sure you're keeping yourself safe when you're cooking. All right, so like I said, we've got our salad and stuff off to the side. We'll get back to that. I am going to get ready for our banh mi sandwiches. So you usually have banh mi on a baguette. So I have here a nice piece of baguette. I'm going to slice it in half. I'm not eyeballing it. That looks like about half to me. And then we're going to slice them through the middle because they're sandwiches, right? So we want it. I'm going to use a serrated knife to make sure it goes through well. All right, perfect. So we're going to take it. I always try to be mindful of how thick the top is, how thick the bottom is. I like to have a nice even sandwich. Perfect. All right. And you can see here the baguette, it's nice. There's these big holes on the inside. Means it was just like nicely aerated, the dough. All right. And same thing, cutting through. All right. Perfect. Perfect. And I can smell all that curry powder in the oven. It smells delicious. So I'm just going to show you how to plate one portion of each of these, mostly just so I'm not using two plates for every single thing. So I'm going to move this piece off to the side of our baguette. I'll take a little plate here. So for our banh mi, I'm going to do it open faced. I feel like that's fun to do it open face. I'll move these off to the side just so that they're out of the way. And first things first, I made before class a little bit of spicy mayo. So spicy mayo, this is just mayo, some sriracha, some lime juice, and a little bit of sesame oil. Now, I was mentioning a creamy dressing before, and using something like Greek yogurt, you could absolutely use Greek yogurt instead of mayo if you want to for something like a spicy, creamy bite on your dish. All right, our tofu is nice and cooked, so I just turned the heat off there. All right, we'll revisit that when we go to put it on the sandwich. So again, I've got in here mayo, lime, sriracha, a little bit of sesame oil. I'm definitely not going to use all of the spicy mayo that I made, but I think is a nice little treat as an addition on this sandwich. Really highlights the flavors. If you don't like spice, again, you just use a regular mayo. You could use hummus instead. That would be a delicious spread. All right, so I got my spicy mayo here. Perfect. I love a sandwich. I don't know about you guys, but I love a sandwich. And not even just for lunch. I think we always think of sandwiches and lunch, dinner, breakfast sandwich. I love a sandwich. All right, I'm going to put this back in the fridge just because I want to make sure that it stays cool since it is mayo. The recipe also calls for putting just a few sprigs of cilantro on the sandwich. So I'll come in, same thing. I'm going to take just a little twist. I'm going to rinse it off. I'm going to kind of squeeze out the moisture, especially because we're putting it onto a sandwich. And then I'm just going to lay some out on one of the sides of the sandwich. Beautiful. Beautiful. I love cilantro. Some people think it tastes like soap. That's actually genetic. It's called a soapy aldehyde that makes you taste soap when you have cilantro. So it's not that you just don't like it, it is your genetics telling you that you don't like it if you've never heard that before. Right, so I'm going to put my slaw, and we have here, it's been sitting and pickling for a while. I'm going to take it out with a fork, take out about half. Again, we're making, two sandwiches. So I kind of like to press it up against the wall of the jar just to get some of that oil and vinegar off of it, or that water and vinegar. All right, and our timer went off for our oven, but remember we said about 15 to 20 minutes, so it's okay if it sits in there for a little extra. So I've got my slaw here. Take just a little bit more. Lucky you, if you're the person who likes slaw, you get a little extra on your sandwich. All right, there's our slaw. And then last but not least, we're gonna put our tofu on it. So I've got my tofu here that had been simmering in the pan. I'll put it on the side with the cilantro, and I'll show you what it looks like. Yum, yum, yum. Perfect. All right, we've got our delicious open face tofu banh mi sandwich. You can see the tofu here. You can see all the slaw and the spicy mayo. Here, and I'll close it up and I'll show you. Oops, I did it backwards. That's okay. There's our delicious sandwich, and really hefty too. Even though it's tofu, we've still got a really thick, delicious sandwich. So I'll put that up here. I'll show you everything at the end. I'm so excited about it. So let's take our last items out of the oven. We've got our chicken and our potatoes and our broccoli. So you can see we've got everything here on the sheet pan. And so I'll go ahead, plate that up for you. And then last but not least, we'll finish off our salad. I'll turn the oven off. So we'll take one piece of chicken. We'll take a couple potatoes. Remember how many potatoes you cut in case you have somebody who's going to call you on it in your house, to make sure you have an even number of potatoes. All right, and then we've got our broccoli and our onions. I just like to get a good little scoop there. And you could certainly make more veg to go with it, or do a steam-in bag of the vegetables on the side. Perfect. Here is our Za'atar sheet pan, chicken, potatoes, and vegetables. And then last but not least, let's finish up our salad. So I'll take out our cauliflower and carrot and chickpea mix. Oh, it looks really good. We've got all of that. I feel like this is a fun addition to the salad because it's warm. So I feel like you have the cold chill of the salad, and then you've got the warmth of all these veggies. Now, you could certainly cook this in advance and wait until it cools. I'm a huge proponent of that as well. However you prefer to eat it. And I'm just going to kind of take it and double it in a little bit here. So we'll put all that and all of this, because this is a 2-person salad. We're going to put all of it. So this is a really veggie dense recipe. If you're trying to get in more vegetables, this is a great way to try and do so. All right, so last but not least, I'm just going to drizzle over the dressing. First, I like to kind of mix the greens and the steamy veg first. It's a nice warm salad. And don't forget about that onion there on the bottom. All right, hold on one second. There we go. Perfect. All right, I'm going to drizzle our dressing over the top. Let me give it one more good mix. Oh, and I forgot about our tahini sauce for our Za'atar chicken. How could I forget? Tahini was the food of the day today. So I'll drizzle that over as a finale for our chicken. All right, so just use tongs to mix everything together. Yum. Oh, this smells so good. And now you'll see when I dish this out in the bowl, it'll probably be a little bit more than two. However, I think it's great for four, maybe as a side dish, or two as a full meal, because it really is a full meal salad that you're having. So we've got our bowl. I'll dish out a good bit here, making sure we have some fun cauliflower and chickpea and carrot on top. Beautiful. Beautiful. All right. And so here is our curry cauliflower and chickpea salad. We also, again, have our tofu banh mi sandwich. I'll move this cutting board out of the way. And last but not least, we've got our Za'atar sheet pan chicken, which has our delicious tahini sauce over top. We'll just drizzle it. So good. All right. And those are our three recipes for today: tofu banh mi sandwich, za'atar sheet pan chicken, curry cauliflower, and chickpea salad. Again, all of these recipes make two servings, dinner for two. Of course, it could be lunch or breakfast for two also, but I just wanted to highlight how to make some smaller batch recipes for those of us who don't necessarily want really large portions. So thanks everybody for hopping on today on a Saturday, both live and on Zoom. Are there any questions I can answer for anyone on dinner for two? All right. Well, if there's no questions, and Rachel, if there's no questions on Facebook, I would invite everybody to try these recipes at home. Send me your pictures. I would love, love, love to see how it goes when you cook them. And we can't wait to see you on another cooking class. As a reminder, visit uniteforher.org/food for thought to view all of our upcoming cooking classes. And you'll see Michelle has some amazing cooking classes coming up, sweet treats. She's making 5 dessert recipes in 1 hour. So definitely hop on. I know I will be there to watch. So I can't wait to see all of you there. And hopefully I'll talk to you soon. Have a great day, everybody. Thanks.